is our time for the Provocateurs panel discussion. First is Nic Bate, who is the Senior Program Officer at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who will talk about how his perspectives across academia, industry, and nonprofits have guided his thinking. So, Nic.
Hey, you guys can hear me okay? I'm assuming you can because you didn't say no.
Yes.
Great, thanks. Hey, really looking forward to this discussion. I'm really pleased to be here. I've already learned a few things, to be honest, so I look forward to the rest of the discussion. And I don't know how the rest of you feel, but I do get the feeling that we are at some sort of junction of innovation. Some sort of change needs to occur. We may not know exactly what that is, but probably after 5 or 10 years, look back and say, that's what was going on. But clearly things need to change. And I'm excited that we can be having this conversation to maybe play some small role in that. So just a little bit about myself. I have spent a career applying genetics to solve problems in crops. I grew up in Western Canada in Southern Alberta, and I just want to highlight a first example on the extreme left there, being canola, which is one of Canada's, I guess, biggest agricultural innovations. If you don't know the story of canola, I suggest you go have a look, because it's kind of a fun story to see how technology and innovation were applied to really having a substantial impact on the Canadian agricultural environment and economics of the Canadian of Canada. And so it really started with how do you transform basically an industrial oil into a food oil? And so it's a great story. I saw that as a child, that transformation of the farmland around me to have all these beautiful yellow flowers, and so after the fact could go back and figure out that story. So it's kind of a fun way to think about innovations in agriculture. So from canola, then I moved on to work for a seed company called Pioneer in Iowa. I worked there for about a decade on corn and soy, mostly around performance traits. So how do you increase the yield or increase drought tolerance or nutrient use efficiency in those key crops? And that's where I really learned about that middle piece there, which is what is really a pipeline. Starts at innovation on the left-hand side around discovery. I was part of the gene discovery team at when I was working with Pioneer, and how you move those innovations through a pipeline of stages and gates that show the value of any particular innovation. And this sort of discipline of asking how innovations have value has been really informative for me for the rest of my career, and how to think about how the fuzzy front end of the discovery is often the fun part, but as many of you know, most of those ideas die in what's called the valley of death for most of these pipelines as you move to validation and go to things like field validation. And so that discipline kind of occupies a lot of my mind in terms of how do you move ideas through from one stage to another, much like you see in pharma discovery and clinical trials and those kinds of things, escalating the expectations for the value of any particular innovation. The last decade or so, I've worked on gene editing. And so the cartoon at the bottom there shows the CRISPR-Cas approach to gene editing. And about the last 10 years, I've been working on how to apply that technology to crop improvement. And the last year, I've been working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And really the idea there was to take that kind of background and that experience and really apply it to some of the more challenging problems that the world faces, especially as we target countries in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. And if you think about it, those are the countries that are going to see the largest effect from things like climate change. So trying to address some of the biggest problems that we see in the world over the next 20 or 50 years by applying some of these principles around genetics and pipeline management. Well, thank you.
Great, thanks, Nic, for that. And we're gonna now have Bre tell us a little bit about her background and sort of, why and what she might be thinking before we get into some questions.
Hi, thank you. And yeah, thanks for having me as a part of this. Hearing the introduction has been super helpful for expanding my understanding of what the purpose and objective of this gathering and the future gatherings for this project are. And it's really exciting. I agree with Nick. We are in a challenging but also exciting time. And this conversation, I think, just explains the opportunity before us. So I am coming to you from Northern California on my small ranching operation. And besides raising livestock, I also work for Western Landowners Alliance, as Jen noted. And Western Landowners Alliance is a landowner founded and led organization working across the Western United States. We advance policies and practices that sustain working lands, connected landscapes, and native species. And we do this through a variety of pathways with peer-to-peer knowledge sharing across landowner groups and conservation partners. We also have a big communications team, and we also do a lot of policy work both at the federal and state levels. I've been with WLA for a little over 2 years now. And before that, I guess to be a little bit more background, and I think maybe why I was invited to join this conversation and be a provocateur. I've worked through a variety of different entities in the ag and conservation space, and have always been in that middle ground of ag and conservation. And I really do believe that ag at its best is conservation at its best, which can lead to some really interesting conversations, because I think that's not what a lot of people believe. And so working from that middle ground and always being willing to jump into conversations, I have found myself in kind of this trajectory that led me to Western Landowners Alliance. And I have worked for agencies. I've worked a little bit in academia, and also then in the nonprofit space and the consulting space. And I worked for 6 years at a conservation science organization. And so you can imagine we were doing a lot of science in that space, a lot of research, but what was happening there is they were developing a working lands program. And so it was really that merging of science with the practical application of working lands, particularly with ranching operations in California. I have found myself, I think, whether I really intended to or wanted to, in more science conversations, more research conversations than I ever would have thought. And I think that becomes when you're working in production agriculture, it automatically leads to the challenges that we are facing in production ag, automatically leads to conversations around science and policy. And it's really the bringing all of those pieces together where we're going to find the solutions moving forward to keep our working lands viable. So that's a bit more about me, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. So thanks, Jen.
Great. I hear a bit of hesitancy. That's okay. Like you think you're looking forward to this conversation. No, we are. I mean, I think, we want you, and I think we've described this before, right? We want you telling us the good and the bad so that people can be hearing and listening and going, oh, how can my behavior or the way that I operate, how can I change to make these relationships better? And so I'm going to maybe start with the first question for both of you, and we'll start with Bre first of, if you could, give us an example of some maybe specific experiences that illustrate a functional partnership. So first, maybe define what you think like a functional partnership is, and then that experience that you had with one of those and the outcomes of what that collaboration meant to either you or the organization that you were working with. And so we'll start, Bre, with you of your experience in that realm of what functional partnerships mean and like the outcome of one of those activities.
Sure. Well, let's see. When I think about functional landscapes, the way that I define that is it's the ability to support life. And I think that's similar with functional partnerships, that, whether we're talking about people, wildlife, plant communities, as we know, all life on Earth is tied to the health of our landscapes. And so that's how I would see a functional partnership as well, that it supports that ability for us to thrive. And in terms of successful partnerships, I'll start actually with, I think, an element of successful partnerships, which leads to them, and kind of some basic principles. And I learned this from my friend Jared Talley, who I think is on today, comes from Boise State. And so Jared taught me this concept of situation, problem, solution. And when I work with people, or when WLA is working with people, and we work on a lot of partnerships all across the West, bringing producers, landowners in, agency partners in, and research partners in, we try and start with that conversation and ground the conversation in the situation. And then we move to collectively defining problems and collectively discovering solutions and implementing them. Another aspect of kind of a principle of effective partnerships I see is this came out of at WLA. We work on there's a West-wide group called the Conflict Reduction Consortium, and it's focused on livestock predator risk management and conflict reduction. And it's a West-wide partnership of multiple stakeholders coming from all different perspectives and backgrounds to find solutions to this challenge. And we have research partners working on that with us. And in that research and advancing policies and practices to address conflict reduction, we have come up, we use the term co-production, and that's kind of our term for use-inspired research, I think, and came up with this framework of feasibility, utility, and risk. And that's what we ask all partners involved in the conversation. Are these, in addressing the problem and looking at potential solutions, each partner has to come to the conversation and be able to say, is it even feasible for me to do this? What's the actual outcome going to be if I do this? And what is the risk associated with it? And how can we collectively mitigate that risk? So I can go into more details as we talk, but those are just some general principles that we think about.
Those are great. Those are great tools and tips and like ways to embrace the diversity. And you actually brought up something I just want to, the terms again, right? So co-production, co-development, like these are things when I talk to folks about this use inspired that people on the social ecological system side go, yeah, isn't this what we've been doing already? And so yes. But I think that we've got a large population of people that maybe don't see themselves in that space of developing in that way, and also see that maybe NSF and other agencies are interested in supporting those types of co-production activities. So I'm glad you brought up that term so that we could sort of think about the overlapping definitions of that and how we operate in that world. Really appreciate that. And Mike, do you want to? I'll let you.
Yeah, so same question for Nic. Can you think of a specific example maybe from your experiences that illustrates an example of a functional partnership and how that worked and the outcome that was enabled by that specific type of collaboration?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's a fascinating question, actually. I think there are a couple of different kind of major components to it. One is kind of more the practical, right? That everybody's pulling in the same direction, that everybody understands the scope, or the risks have been identified, expectations have been identified, a lot of the kind of structural, what I think of as sort of project management structural stuff. And I think that's really critical to have some, again, structure and some discipline to those pieces. The other part of it is more the EQ side, right? The kind of a relationship management piece. That is really essential, and the established trust early, take the time to do that properly. You have support within whatever collaboration you're trying to accomplish for that kind of element to an interaction. I think is really important, and you don't take that for granted, right? It's not all about the deliverables and the outcomes. For me, I've spent a lot of my time either participating in or managing or leading interactions with academic institutions throughout my career. So if I share an experience, it'll be an amalgam of many of those. But the good ones, are the ones where I again, everybody's sort of pulling in the same directions and knows exactly what the goal is, what the outcomes are intended to be, the path towards that. Establishing risks early, which Bre mentioned, I think is really essential. Everybody's on board with that. In fact, it's always a good exercise right in the very beginning to just sit down and establish, brainstorm on what are the risks across this project. I think it gets everybody thinking about the outcomes and how we're going to get there. And really, I think it's just a lot about clear goals, communication, and expectations, and that everybody understands their role for the project or the outcome. And then lastly, I would say the freedom to pivot. That when things don't go, and often they don't, right? They don't go the way that you expected, or that you discover something new and innovative along the way. There has to be opportunities to kind of pivot towards things, and I think that's an essential piece of it. You can predict what a 5-year project might look like, 5-year interaction on day one, but it's very unlikely that on the end of the 5th year, you're going to be in the same place, right? And so having some ability to sort of go with the flow and pivot when necessary, I think is really important too.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah. Jen, do we want to get one of the questions from the KI?
Yeah, I'm thinking there's a really good one in there that kind of resonates a little bit. Of you guys have had these experiences, and a couple people are asking, what are these skill sets that or experiences that you had that led you to have the skill set to have these partnerships? And I might even follow up a little bit on that of like, what are we not doing in our training programs to give that skill set that's needed? So I'll be listening for what those skill sets are from you. And then I think maybe one of the outcomes of this is, how do we change the way we train our students and our workforce so that they're better prepared and don't have to maybe learn it on the ground, on the go, that we can sort of prime them ahead of time. So Bre, if you could maybe think about what you think those major skill sets are, and whether or not you think that we're providing some of that in our training in our universities.
Yeah, I think for me, what has benefited me is that I grew up in ranching, and so just having, and for the work that I do in particular, working with landowners and partners across the West on that intersection of ranching and conservation, having that just deep-seated understanding of what ranching families are dealing with, so that kind of back to that situation aspect of it is helpful. I think then there's just maybe some personality traits that I happen to have, and I don't know how these were developed because of positive reinforcement and feedback that led me to want to develop them. But this statement of, I have a friend that we joke around about this a lot, and I have a magnet that says life begins where your comfort zone ends, and so just embracing that, and the concept of leaning into things that really seem uncomfortable or challenging, and figuring them out. And there's also just the idea that people are amazing. They really are, they're just amazing. And when we get to know people and get to know things, we want to know more about them. And so it's this building reciprocal cycle of, the more you know about something, the more you like it and love it. And then the more you like and love something, even the more you want to know about it. And so just embracing that, I think, has then led me to be invited to conversations, and I have a hard time saying no. So then it's always yes, 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 let's do more. So I think it's just some of that. And in terms of the training aspect, I do think that experiential piece is so critical. And so whatever the field of study is, how do we get young people out? And I just, I was so lucky to be able to grow up in that space, that I had that from a small, and I mean, not just on working lands and ranching, but we did so much hiking, and my mom was really into geology when I was growing up. And so we were just out on the land all the time and exploring things. And so whatever the opportunities are to get young kids and all the way through, even college and education and into graduate studies, whether it's internships or other opportunities, I just think that that's critical, because that's what's going to build that understanding of the opportunities and people, and so internships with people and with industry. And I just think it's critical to have that base.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I'm here like sense of place and this experiential learning that is just outside of the comfort zone with a little bit of structure of support around that could go a long way. So I appreciate that. Nic, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that was really great to hear Bre talk about all those things, because I do think you start by bringing your best self to something, right? You know, your shared experience, your experiences, and your abilities, but then you have to really, as Bre said, lead into some discomfort. I think that's really important to really break some of the barriers that you have as you come into a new situation like that. But you know, this things are so much better than they used to be, because when I was in back when I was in university, we had no training on anything except the kind of academic curriculum in front of us, right? That's kind of what we were taught. And I think there's just so many more resources now than there used to be on how to work together as teams, how to collaborate, project management skills. And I don't know if those are widely deployed, and I don't know, how consistent that is across educational institutions, but I have seen it throughout the course of my career, how people have just gotten better at that kind of thing. But encouraging that, some of those tools and just basic training on how to work together as a team, just that's really essential. And that you will have the time and the patience, if you've established trust, to help each other do better, right? And so that may take time as well, but it's a really important component too, is just working together as a team, and the tools to do that are just really important. So I'm kind of jealous, to be honest, because like I said, when I started, there was you had in a lab, it was your buckle to the bench, right? You worked all day with your knees under a bench, and that's all you did, right? And I think it's changed a lot. People interact a lot more than they used to, but that is going to have to continue, because it's just so essential to future innovations. Absolutely.
Thanks, Nic. We've got several questions in the KI platform, sort of lumping together over a central question, and that is, I guess we'll start with Nic, and then Bre can weigh in. Can you think of ways that would either incentivize, inspired, or maybe try to convince people that haven't really thought about or are think how to encourage them to do more use-inspired, or to move into the use-inspired research space? And again, I think because it's, as Nic said, not a solo endeavor, it's by definition a team sport. You have to give some control up and trust others, and that requires, I think, incentives, which I think this workshop is one first step into that space, right? Is to have conversations and to learn definitions and hear from people that have working in there before. But I'll let Nic comment first, and then Bre.
Yeah, I think good comment. You almost answered it for me, Mike. Thanks. But yeah, I think that you hit on something there around incentive. And I do think that the reward structure around how we conduct science in this country is a little bit off target for where we need to be. I think that is it exciting to go into use-inspired research? It sure should be, right? I mean, some of the most exciting, interesting stories on the planet are going to be use-inspired stories, right? And so I think storytelling has to be a really important part of that. We have to tell better stories and tell them more effectively. And it can't be sort of a dry thing like we got to increase yield by 5% or whatever. It's got to be a compelling and interesting story. But also, I think we have to overall change the reward structure for how things are done, right? Some of the things that will hopefully come out of research in the next 5 or 10 years through initiatives like this will could change the world, right? And so we should be incentivized to want to do that rather than getting a paper in Science. Yeah, I mean, really? So I think the way we tell the stories and how we get people excited about it needs to change maybe, but I think that's the key really to unlocking that.
Bre.
Sorry, we're on spring break right now, so that was my son. Yeah, I agree a lot with that in terms of what are the current reward systems, what are the current incentives, and what tweaks need to be made to that. And I will say, when we work in partnership with researchers on our projects, we do often come up against the challenges of publishing and those current incentives and what's required. So I think one of the things, this kind of back to like the risk place, and I so often hear folks asking farmers and ranchers or other industries to change, right? We need to improve, we need to advance, we need to innovate, and they're always being expected to change which is good. And we should always be innovating and thinking about opportunities, but understanding that with opportunities, there is that risk associated with it and with change. And I very rarely hear researchers coming into this space saying, I know there's risk for you and I'm willing to take on some risks myself. And I also need to push the limits in my own field or my own discipline to meet you. And so we're going to share that risk. And so if it means, thinking about analysis in a different way or looking at other alternatives to publish, and that's tough, right? We all know it's tough. And we hear this from ranchers and farmers that it's not just putting yourself at risk in terms of your financial viability in your operation, it's putting yourself at risk in your community and what your community thinks of you and how they respond and how they include you or not. And we work with a lot of ranchers across the West that are kind of that, the crazy person in the community because of some of the things that they're implementing on their operations. But they're willing to take that. They're willing to be, at the forefront of change adoption and take that risk. And then hopefully we can help them again, mitigate that. But that's what I would love to see is, and since I don't come from the researcher side, I don't know what the specific incentives would be, but I do agree with Nic that, I would think just from a human standpoint and that working together with people has its own incentives, and that I think as people, we all want to be helpful. And so just getting back to that what does it mean to be helpful, to do research in a way that benefits other people and benefits society in general? And then how can we all help to change those incentives and get rid of some of those systemic challenges that are there?
Now, I think like if any of the academics are here and if we have any administrators here from our institutions, the two things I heard, this experiential learning, right? We have evidence-based practices in our classrooms now that took actually a lot of time to change how we teach. And we are, I think, ready to change the way in which we incentivize and value the things that you guys are talking about. And so I think one of the outcomes of this is hopefully a call to action for our administrators of changing the way we value the things that people do that connect with people and that actually have longer term outcomes without the immediate publication in the beginning. So I appreciate those words, and we've got it recorded, and we will be sort of capitalizing on some of that. Mike, do you have another question?
Sure. I think actually Bre kind of touched on that just now, and that we've heard sort of the positive things that have come out of youth-inspired and collaborative work like this across sectors. Can you think of one or more significant barriers that maybe prevents or has hindered effective movement forward? And I'll start with Bre, I think, if that's okay. Sure. And be honest. This is, as Jen said, we're here for the good, the bad, and the ugly, because we all have to be aware of these things. And if something didn't work well, we have to discuss ways to figure out how to solve that problem to be able to work together and to do more. So we have huge societal problems that need solving, and the young people that I talk to in my classes, this is what's really motivating them. You know, this is the planet they're inheriting, and they know there's a lot of issues, and they want to be part of the solution. So
I definitely do think there are some of those larger systemic challenges, and that's going to take collective action and work. So finding the people that also recognize that, like I think people that are on today, that's what I'm understanding. And so there's that aspect of it. I think there's also the recognition of the value of capacity and facilitation. And that's often in a lot of the work we do, that's not recognized, and it's underfunded. And so when we start talking about the social aspect of it and the connection, that takes work, right? We know that takes work. I mean, for anybody who's been in a relationship with another person, whether it's a boyfriend, girlfriend, marriage, whatever it is, we know it takes work, and we have to invest the time and resources into those relationships. And so whether it's a one-on-one or a larger relationship, and I would say, right, the larger the relationship is and the more perspectives, even more work that it takes and more capacity. So I think that's something that we need to shift at multiple levels. I think too, then just at like the kind of the personal level, what I see is we have built-in muscle memory for how we do our work, right? And so we have our go-to, and we're all overtaxed. We're all so busy. And so when we get busy and we just get like reactive instead of responsive, then that reaction is to go back to that muscle memory of, oh, I know how to do this, or I've done this before. And so we engage in kind of the same old behavior of showing up and interacting with others, engaging, bringing what we know. And so we tend to go back to like what we know rather than that place of curiosity and what do others know, and what can I learn from all these people in this group. And I see that with the way that we initiate research questions, right? The standard process is we do the literature review, and then we come with questions that emerge from the literature review or the science that's been done in the past. But where I see it being really effective is when we scrap the literature review like in the beginning, do it later, but actually start with just having conversation with those users, and with that team that's coming together on whatever the topic or project is. And it's kind of that idea of like grounded theory, I guess. Sorry, I don't know if I'm using the right words, but I listen to a lot of Bre Brown, right? So this like idea of grounded theory and letting the questions bubble up from the conversation. And that's what I see being so effective. And so when we have conversations with landowner groups and their conservation partners and researchers, like we just start there. Let's just talk and not come with, you know, these questions already in mind. So top there.
Nic?
Yeah, that's given me a lot to think of. But yeah, I would start with the kind of another kind of element of this, and that is to me, you don't get use-inspired research mixed up with basic research, right? And so I think you have to let basic research do basic research, but sort of forcing that to be something other than it's not is a mistake, right? And so I'll give you a couple of examples. We read a lot of grant proposals or publications, and the first sentence is, we are going to solve this big problem. And then they talk about all the cool stuff they're going to do, right? And it's kind of, it's a little bit, no, I'll say disingenuous, but it's a little misleading, right? You want to do this good research, and there's important curiosity-driven impact to it, potential for impact. Don't sort of mix that up with use-inspired research. You let that be what it is, right? And yet at the same time, you don't want to call basic research what it isn't, which kind of cloaking it in use-inspired research. So I think that's something I see quite a lot of, right? And I think as a funding agencies, it's really important that you recognize the importance of basic research, fund it appropriately, let it do what it does, be disruptive or whatever, answer some basic fundamental questions, and then focus the kind of the offshoot of that in terms of applied or the kind of research we're talking about today. So I think that mixing those up is a really important one. The other is around communication, and this is it's an easy thing to say. You know, communication is a problem, but I see it all the time, and you can have a team of people working on the same subject towards the same goal, but really struggle to talk to each other. It's the language they use, the kind of terms they use. I think it was the vector example we saw earlier today, right? You know, words mean different things to different people, and you have to really take the time to do that kind of communication piece properly. And it's not only in the words we use, it's the way that we effectively communicate. And to get into Bre's point, we're in these ruts, right? We don't even see that we're doing it. The way we approach problems and problem solving. And I'll give you a quick example. You know, academics tend to look at things as, I'm going to synthesize this information, then I'm going to do these experiments, and I'm going to go, ta-da, you know, this is going to be the way I communicate everything that I do. In industry, it's kind of the flip of that. It's like, here's the goal. What do we need to do to get there? And so that difference in communication, I've seen it happen time and time again, and between academic and industry, just that basic pattern of thinking and communicating is different. So even if you may use the same words, it's just the way you think is a little bit different. You really have to take the time to get through a lot of those things. And so that's a pattern I see probably in almost every academic interaction, actually. So it's something to think about.
Thank you guys for both of those. One thing I wanted to say, this like basic, we've gotten both when we were preparing for this, and then some of the questions, this divide, if you will, between the basic science and the applied. But I think there's a gradient, and I also want to come back to something you said, Nic, about like having that freedom to move across this gradient and not feel stuck in one or the other, but being able to sort of clearly define what it is you're doing, and knowing that NSF is not, as far as our discussions, changing the way in which they invest in basic science. So those of you that are afraid of that, that's not what's happening. It's actually opening up a new way of thinking about how your work, so that instead of the broader impacts on the end, you're actually having those conversations about the broader impacts at the beginning. So kind of keep that in mind, that it doesn't mean that you can't do basic science or that that's not going to support it, but having those open conversations at the beginning might actually change the system or the way in which you ask those basic science questions. So be courageous about thinking about that way. Mike, anything, do we want a quick, like maybe on if you guys could change one thing, I don't know if that's asking too much, to prepare for the future, what would that be?
I can go. Yeah, back, sorry.
We have 30 seconds.
Yeah, 30 seconds. I would say, you know, this question around incentives, I think that's what I would change. That would be a big one. Motivation and incentives.
Excellent. Bre, what do you think?
I think so too. It seems to me, especially from the academia side or the researcher side, that incentives do need to change. We hear that all the time when working with research partners. I think there's also a societal narrative around where different forms of knowledge fit into innovation. Yeah. And I would like to see that change on a big scale. And I would like to see the various forms of knowledge recognized for the value that they bring to solutions. So
I agree. Mike, any other closing thoughts?
Just a couple of things is that for everybody here, of course, you know, there's excellent sticky note questions going in the K-Storm. There's fabulous conversations happening in the Zoom chat. And this is one of the main reasons we're doing this workshop, right? Is we don't have solutions for any of this. I think no one does, right? But this is the first step of starting a discussion with people that have interests around this area in many different parts of it. And that our hope is through this workshop and then the next workshop in May, that we will start to kind of come up with an idea of what our the main ways that we can start to break down these barriers, change the incentives, start to identify people that have shared interests, start to form little communities of people across sectors that want to tackle these different problems and move forward. So yeah, I mean, you guys are going to help us come up with the solutions. Believe me, I don't have any. But the conversations that are happening through Zoom and in the KI thing, I think are just fabulous. This is, you know, what we really hoped would start to happen and keep going. And I think the discussion with Nic and Bre here has just been awesome. So thank you guys for your insight, and we continue to want your thoughts as the workshop proceeds.